Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Tinker Tribe podcast. I'm your host, Greg Dowd. Today, I have the pleasure to sit down with someone who I am incredibly grateful to know, Alan Booker. Alan has a background in electrical engineering and work in the field of telecommunications and large-scale computer systems for a number of years. Alan began studying permaculture under Jeff Lawton. Alan is the founder and executive director of the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design, which provides education and research in support of regenerative communities. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down for a conversation with me today. And welcome to the Tinker Tribe podcast. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
I wanted to just start off, Alan, of diving into some of your background. So I know you have the technical background in electrical engineering, and you worked in telecom for a great number of years, but then you shifted into permaculture and permaculture design. What was the genesis of why you wanted to leave that career and then starting to focus on permaculture?
Well, it'd probably be much more accurate to say that they overlapped by a couple of decades.
Okay.
Because at the time I was in electrical engineering back in the 1980s in college, and ended up graduating, coming out. And the way I like to tell this story is I said that there was this newfangled thing that I got pulled into. It was called the internet, and back then it really was. It was, there was the legislation to open up ARPANET and everything to the public. And what we now think of as the internet was just becoming accessible in the 90s to the average folks. Before that, it had just been government, agencies, military, large universities, and a lot of the big tech companies. And that's when the first time I actually connected to the internet was in the 1980s, what would become the internet.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you were really early with that.
I was in it from the very beginning, and of the scale up. And so I got pulled out into what we would now call cloud computing and large scale Unix servers, and then right out of that into digital telecom. But that was figuring out how we were going to do this project of scaling up the internet and so forth. And ended up, for the people who are here around in the Huntsville area, I worked with Adtran for a long time. Working on helping them run their R&D infrastructure and thinking about a lot of that, and for a long time. And as I started getting into looking at and thinking about global infrastructure like the internet and so forth, it became pretty evident to me how much that was broadly destructive. That it was using a huge amount of energy, it was using a huge amount of resources, that it was very extractive in the sense that it took a lot of natural resources, it did things with them, and when it was done, it basically dumped them as waste back into the biosphere.
Okay.
So when you look at that and you think about this and you realize, well, the whole project of human civilization is growing exponentially. The economy, in order to keep it growing, has to double about every 25 years. Otherwise, it at least once every 25 years, or it's going to fall apart just because how it's structured. And I won't go into that. There's a whole series of technically why our debt-based fiat money economy has to grow exponentially, and there's a minimum rate to that. There's a great deal of study you can do to understand why that's true. But it's just structurally true. It comes from some assumptions that were made when the system was formed a couple hundred years ago about growth being good, and that if the economy grew, then what would happen would be, the idea was a rising tide would raise all boats, which was the funny way of saying, if we just expand and expand and expand human economy, then everybody will get richer. And we'll solve the whole poverty problem, and we'll make everybody's life great by just, growing this thing. And so the whole economic system was predicated on that. And so by the time we got engineering happening in the 20th century, engineering was predicated on grow, 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 grow. And what we were growing was a system of like grabbing stuff from the natural environment, turning it into some dead technology, right?
Hmm.
By the time we got done, we dumped it back into the biosphere, and back into nature. But usually by that point in time, we had made it kind of toxic, so it was waste. And so you kind of scratch your head and go, we're on a finite planet. And if you have to double what you're doing every 25 years, there's a stop to that at some point, right?
Yeah.
It's like the doubling gets you at some point, right?
Yeah, that gets out of hand. Yeah.
Out of hand and so forth. So back in the 1990s, I was looking at it going, yeah, we don't have too many more doublings left. We're now using so much that their extraction on the front end and the dumping on the back end are piling up, and the ecosystem is really being stressed. And yeah, if we kept it at the 1990s level, we could have done it for a while longer. But now we've doubled it more than we've doubled it plus from the early 1990s till now. And so at this point, we have 8 billion people on the planet all wanting to double it again in the next 25 years, and it's just not in the cards to be able to do that. If you look at all of it, you could just use pure math, and I could look at it and go, yep, this is a problem. How are we going to work with this? And and economic system is going to drive it, and it's going to force that exponential growth paradigm on all the designers, the engineers and the architects and the urban planners and the business folks and all of them. They're all along for the ride, double or bust. And so here we go. And you're like, yeah, this is not going to end well. We got to come up with some alternatives, right?
Yeah.
And so in the 1990s, it was like, well, okay, I'm sitting here scratching my head going, well, maybe I'll go back and get a PhD in a thing that helps address this. And the answer was, well, yeah, it didn't exist. Nobody in the 1990s, I went looking for the fun of it to see if anybody in the 1990s had a degree program, PhD in not destroying the world.
Yeah.
And it didn't exist, right? That was like, well, we're a university. We don't do that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Now, since then, there have been a lot of university programs with talking about sustainability and so forth. And just honestly, most of them are a little weak. I reviewed their curriculum and so forth, and it's pretty weak. It's basically, well, how are we not going to destroy? Well, I tell you, we'll make everything this much less awful. We'll destroy the world this much more slowly, but we'll be really scientific about it. And we'll say we're going to quantify how awful what we're doing is. And now we'll give you rewards for being 20% less awful than you were before. So now congratulations, you're destroying the planet that we need to leave to our grandchildren 20% more slowly.
Ah.
Right?
Yeah.
See, we can give ourselves a gold star. We can give ourselves a LEED, LEED building plaque to go in our, so on and so forth.
Six Sigma.
Yeah, we can do all this we can feel really good about that because we've done our thing. We're now sustainable. And of course, I had started looking at this in the 90s. And so I had really been doing a lot of research on it. And interestingly, the way I got into the permaculture was looking around and realizing that the permaculturists were some of the ones doing some very interesting things.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
An engineer, it's like, I'm practical. I don't want a lot of theory that doesn't have proof of, if your theory is great, but unless you can
show
it to me working, I'm kind of skeptical.
Give me some empirical results that
exactly
are
right.
And repeatable.
Yep. Turned out the permaculturists were some of the ones that were doing some really interesting stuff, and they were doing it on different continents and different climate zones and different biosphere, different biomes, bioregions, right? And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Let's go figure out what they're up to, right? And so it actually turned out that I was doing permaculture in the very late 1990s and early 2000s I had to have the designer's manual shipped over from Australia because you couldn't get it in the US when I first went looking for it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and it actually wasn't until 2007 that I got to actually fly over to Portland, Oregon and do a PDC in person with Jeff Lawton. I had been studying and read do all this stuff, designer's manual. For those of you who know permaculture, Gaia's Garden, of course, and all the Toby's book and all of that. And so I'm studying soil microbiology and regenerative ag and all this sort of stuff from that point in time.
From the books.
From the book, but also going and like working with people who are doing it and seeing it and doing site visits and hands-on and so on and so forth, and doing doing a lot of different permaculture stuff. But it was in 2007 that finally it was like, oh well, Jeff's going to be here and doing the thing. And so I flew up to Portland, Oregon, and here's a little thing for anybody who's a permaculture geeky person. What was interesting was Jeff had to be a little late arriving in Portland because he got stuck in Jordan on a project. It's where they were doing the Greening the Desert thing.
Oh, wow. That's legendary. I love that. That was one of the things that hooked me into permaculture.
Right. And so he was over there working on it. And they had that video had just come out a while before that. And so he was over there at that site again. And so when we arrived, they're like, well, Jeff can't be here for a couple of days. So what we did is we found Darren Doherty, who is just happened to be over here in the US. And we called him and got him to come over, and he's going to start the course, and then Jeff is going to land, right? So Darren is like legendary keyline design, and he does the Regrarians platform now, right?
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Yeah. So the permaculture geeks will probably, we know who Darren is. He's like, keyline design, yeoman's plow design, all that, and the Regrarians platform. He's doing all that. And as far as I know, I don't think he and Jeff have ever co-taught a PDC other than that one.
Okay.
And it was actually quite interesting. And we were doing the whole thing and running around, and this guy had just published a book on watershed and watershed management and rainwater catch and all that. His name was Brad Lancaster, and he stopped by and gave a presentation. Of course, now Brad is very well known for his publishing the series on rainwater catch and all that, and founding the watershed management group out of Tucson. And so we had all this really cool stuff happening, and so we had
like a meeting of the minds there.
Darren Doherty and Jeff Lawton all together at this PDC in 2007, and so that was kind of fun. And so there's a lot more to the story about all the other things. I started going and studying biomimetic design, or bio-inspired design, and regenerative buildings, green buildings, but also like natural building, and working with like cultural systems and all of that, because I knew that was going to play deeply into all of it. And so by around 2010, I was starting to actually understand that permaculture was doing some very interesting things with regenerative agriculture, and even starting to think about like being applied to energy systems and water catchment, so on and so forth. And, it's doing a lot of other fun things. Going and getting to like meet Sepp Holzer when he was here, and, do things with him. And so I'm just kind of going around and having fun. And that's when I actually also met Zach Weiss. You mentioned when we were talking before we came on about water and so forth. And Zach, of course, famously is one of Sepp's proteges, and is now doing Water Stories, which is doing a lot of really cool, awesome stuff with water and regenerative. So got to know Zach and all the players, right? And
now, were you still working in the telecom industry at the time?
Working, yep. So what I was ending up doing was I'd come back and we do all the telecom, we get the internet going and so forth. And it'd be like, okay, and now I'm out the back door and I'm going to go all over the world and do all the things, right? And then I was starting to teach and consult on the side. And yeah, because just, I don't like to be bored.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Yeah.
It was, and it's just how I'm kind of put together. It's like, yeah, we're just on it. We're going. And so I started to realize that we needed to be able to apply permaculture to, well, how should I put this? The thinking behind permaculture was the thinking of working with nature instead of against it.
Yeah.
And it needed to be applied everywhere, to engineering, to architecture, to urban planning, to, this, all of it.
All these design sciences.
All the design things that are like going to build our civilization, right? We got to do that. And so I started scratching my head and thinking, what does that look like? And doing all the research. And that was a big technical deep dive. And I developed this thing called the Integrated Regenerative Design Framework, because what I realized was that like the design methodology behind permaculture was often one designer designing like one little thing, like a homestead or a farm. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, you don't design a major city with one designer, sitting down with a pencil and a sketch. No, it's like, and if anybody's been to a PDC, like that whole design process is, kind of like getting designers their training wheels to design like a homestead or whatever, right? And
okay,
right. But it's like, okay, now we're going to design multi-billion-dollar infrastructure to run a major metropolitan area. No, it's not the same thing, right?
No.
And so I was like, we've got to create a framework that allows for that, right? That we can take people who have backgrounds in civil engineering and mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, all the stuff, bring them in and train them in a way that they could take their expertise and apply it in a regenerative way.
Right? Okay. Yeah.
So that's where the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design comes in, where now we teach these advanced, like graduate level courses to scientists, engineers, all these different, and also finance, business, all of it together. We teach them to work together in these big teams in a way that can design large scale infrastructure and it really be regenerative and not just greenwashed, sustainable.
Yeah.
So much of what is called sustainable means no, it's not. It's greenwashed, and you can't really sustain it over a long period of time. Like we said, it's destroying things a little more slowly. Okay, good. Right.
Or it's like more control, right? It's like you can only drive so far or you lose your credits or something like that. It's about control instead of
that's the technocratic idea. And
yeah.
So in the very first professional course we do, we actually attack that whole thing, because we can't actually make people understand how to do regenerative design if they are designing from this really interesting place. I don't want to dig into it too deep. We unpack this for a lot. But what was interesting is part of the beginning of the scientific revolution was this idea when Isaac Newton was able to write some simple equations that let us understand how things moved here on Earth, but they also let us understand how the planets move and orbits and everything. And people got really excited at that point in time and said, oh, look, maybe the whole universe can be understood with a few simple equations, right? Maybe the whole universe is this simple wind-up clock. And if we understand all the gears, we can make the universe do what we want. And that was the scientific revolution. It's like, well, if it's a watch, wind up, the universe is a wind up clock. What do? Well, you take it apart gear by gear and you study all the gears. And once you understand all the gears and all the springs and all that sort of stuff, ta-da, you understand the clock and you can make it do what you want it to do. Well, that was the promise of the Enlightenment and modern science. And of course, what happened was we got to the 20th century and we realized that, yeah, nature isn't that way at all. Right?
Yeah.
Literally. So like I go through this whole thing with, because these people who have deep backgrounds in science and engineering and so forth, like, yeah, here was the promise, Rene Descartes and Isaac Newton, and how that all came together to create what we now call the Cartesian Newtonian mechanistic reductionist paradigm.
Yeah.
Right? Take it apart piece by piece, study the pieces. When you're done, you understand it all, right? And we're like, yeah, ta-da, we're done. And we got to the 20th century, and then like, oh, quantum mechanics, and then we were like, oh,
no, that throws a wrench in.
It throws a wrench into it, and we're like, all these, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and all these sorts of things just start. Then we get into complexity science in the late, 20th century, and it's like complex systems, and they're completely non-predictable, and they have sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and they have emergent properties, and it's like you can't even, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened was the sciences all realized, yeah, okay, no, just kidding. You can't really understand the universe by taking it apart and studying the pieces, because when the pieces all start interacting, the interactions start creating things that you could never have guessed from just looking at the individual pieces by themselves. It's called emergent properties, right?
Yeah, it's like Douglas Adams' infinite probability drive or something like that.
Like all this stuff starts happening. So now the sciences understand that you can't understand the universe with this clockwork thing, but the designers are almost all still stuck back in that, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is, to them, this is where we're getting to that technocracy thing, right? Oh, well, if we just had more understanding of the clockwork and more control over the clockwork, that we can make it behave, right?
Yeah.
And this is critically important, because you get behind these people who are driving the technocracy, who are convinced that the reason we haven't been able to make the system behave the way we want it to is because the experts don't have enough control, right?
Yeah.
Give some really smart people, this is the thinking, you could give some really smart people enough information about the whole system, and if you can make everybody cooperate and just behave themselves,
yeah,
right? And they would all listen to the experts, and they would just go along with what we're telling them they have to do, we could solve all these problems. And the answer is, I'm not taking any political stance here. What I'm telling you as a systems engineer and system dynamicist is that science tells us that that is not only wrong, it's actually completely doomed to fail.
I agree. Yeah.
In a complex system, that attempt to, so one of the statements we make is this: you cannot control a complex system. You can merely present it with stimuli. You can poke it, right?
Yeah, wow, that's pretty profound. Yeah.
Right? So it's like something is like your dog, right? You have a dog. You can't control a dog. You can present it with stimuli, right? So we've learned to try to train a dog by, reinforcement, reward, and praise, and so on and so forth. And we try to work with, our dog in order to get the behavior we want.
Right.
That's a little closer to maybe if you've ever tried growing a garden, you understand that you can't control a garden, right?
Yeah.
You can work with it.
Yeah.
Okay? You can work with your garden. You can work in your garden. You can cooperate with all the things growing in your garden. And if you cooperate well, you might have food at the end.
Yeah, that's a big might. Yeah.
Right. But that's the reality of working with any complex system. So where we have now is we have a bureaucracy that has been put in place at different layers of government all over the world, who is, of course, trying to justify their own existence, because that's what bureaucracies do.
Yeah.
And they're convinced that they can't do their job because they don't have enough information and they don't have enough control. Okay.
Yep.
And so this is the natural emergence of technocracy. And what's interesting is you don't have to have any mustache twirling villains for this to happen, right?
Yeah.
Now, there are a few mustache twirling villains in the world, right? But there isn't one committee of them all sitting in a smoke-filled room somewhere calling all the shots. It's not how it works. The system is too big and too complex for that. What happens is when you get so many bureaucracies doing so many things, this just happens. And so what we're in now is we are in the final rush to the death of technocracy, which is that all these bureaucracies are pushing for ever increasing amounts of control so that they are convinced that finally we can fix all of this, right? And again,
I think you mentioned Rene Descartes. I read a book recently about utopias and the idea of utopias.
Yeah.
And I believe Rene Descartes wrote a book about utopia where he was describing exactly what you're talking about, that the experts would organize society and they could do it the best so that society would be this new utopia built on the expertise of all these individual experts. And I think it even goes back further with Plato and the Republic.
It goes all the way back to the Greeks, right? So now we understand it cannot work because it's what we now know about systems dynamics. We know it cannot work, will not work. Number two, what's quite interesting is, as some psychologists have now pointed out, the way humans are put together is if you somehow did manage to put them into a utopia, the first thing they would do is burn it down so something interesting would happen.
Right. Yeah, because the struggle is part of growth as a human being. So.
Right. And that's just part of human nature. So your utopia is great until you have to put people in it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, actually, no, your utopia isn't great because it's a complex system and you cannot actually do that. You notice nature, and I tell all the engineers and so forth, that nature is a 4 billion year R&D program, right?
Yeah. It's like a self-learning mechanism.
Out, right? And it's like you don't find centralized command and control in nature because complexity does not conform to centralized command and control. It's actually devolved to centralized decision making where all the feedback loops are really short and all of the information is very local. And that distributed decision making actually creates much smarter decisions than any form of centralized command and control, right?
Right.
So when we're looking at it, even talking about how do we design a regenerative system at scale, we have to devolve all kinds. It's like the central, hierarchical command, like the org chart that you're used to with the CEO up here and executive vice presidents. It's like that fails. I have a comic that I love. It's from one of my books, and it's basically this engineer in front of like the C-suite, like the CEO and the executive vice presidents and so forth. And he's showing them this board, and he says this. He says, I have 10 minutes to explain to you this incredibly complex things that we've spent the last 2 years developing, after which you have to pretend to understand it well enough to make all the decisions. Right?
Yeah. I get it because my background is a technical background. Yeah.
I've been in that room, right? It's like where we've done all this work and we're like coming in and we're trying to help them understand, because they've got to make the decision. Okay. And they're, and of course, it's like, they got to get to the next meeting, right?
Yeah.
You got this long, right? And I've had places where it's like, they told me, I would write up a report for them. They'd be like, okay, the one pager doesn't have enough detail, right? So I ended up with like, here's the 3 versions, or here's the 1-pager executive summary. And then here's the 6-pager that like fills it in. And here's the 55-pager with all the technical details, right? And it's like, there, right? And of course, they're like, read which one you want, right? And then they don't read any of them, right? It's like they couldn't even read the 1-pager. They show up in the and so forth. And it's like, well, of course, I'm not kind of blaming these, because these folks are like, they're just crazy busy. They're like 70-hour, 80-hour weeks and so forth. And you get,
is it going to work? Is what they want to know.
Right? How much is it going to cost? It's going to work and so forth. And so you're trying to get them to like make an informed decision about something that they. So it's like, we know if there's a reason that Dilbert cartoons were so popular, right? It was like, this idea that you could even run a good medium-sized company with centralized command and control is farcical, right?
Yeah.
And so we make fun of how like
absurd
this is, and now we're trying to run the whole planet, right?
In that same format.
8 billion people and all these different cultures and different climate zones and different bioregions and different it's like, and you think that you're going to get some bunch of technocrats sitting in one place making decisions that can actually apply to all of that. It's like, it's crazy.
Right.
So part of what we're having to do is basically go in and say, look, that whole centralized approach is degenerative from its, you just have to get rid of it, right?
It's set for failure from the beginning.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, when I am rigorously non-political, because I don't feel like I don't care who you vote in up in Washington, they're not going to solve the problem, because that's attacking the problem at the wrong order of scale, right? It's
I agree,
from a systems engineering perspective, you're asking people to do an impossible thing. So I don't care if you got the most brilliant people we got, the most honest people we've got, which we'll never get, but I mean, if you could magically get them there, in the most altruistic people and all that, you put them up there, they'd still fail, right?
Yep, I agree.
You're just asking for decisions at the wrong order of scale for it to function. So, but okay. So where we are is we're in the last gasp of that, where they're going to try it, and they're going to try to like gather the last bits of power together and get this to sort of totalitarian technocratic thing going, because they're convinced that's the only way to like.
They're stuck in this worldview that they've been taught through the Ivy League schools and everything, that this is the correct way of going, and this is how we're going to do it. Yeah.
How we're going to do it. Right. And so there you go. And so what I'm up to is like going, wow, when this whole thing like
plays out the way I think it's going to play out.
Exactly right. It's gonna end messily.
Yeah.
Right. Because this approach will fail, and I can just say that from a systems perspective, it will fail. And then like, okay, well, now what do we do?
Right? Yeah. And
so part of what we're trying to do with the frameworks I'm playing with, is be like, this is how we can actually have, this is, if you're going to have any form of more complex society with technology, here's how it has to be done so that it can function. And it looks an awful lot more like how nature solves the problem than how Ivy League technocrats have traditionally tried to solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where we are today. And what's interesting is that we're in that moment when the forward-thinking folks are realizing that okay, we've now done the technocracy up to this level. It's obvious now that it's not going to work, but what do we do? And so what's interesting is, as I'm bringing in some of these alternatives and we're having these discussions, that it's like, this is what we'll end up having to do because it's the only approach that actually works with complex systems. And the reason we know it works is because life has been doing this for close to 4 billion years, and it has worked, and it has been resilient through all kinds of catastrophes and stresses and everything else. It's always managed to come back, reorganize itself, and go forward and grow. And so it's like, yep, we need to learn from the success that nature has had. And so what I'm trying to do is take, we call it bio-inspired, biomimetic design, and like bring it in and look at it and so forth. So that's how I got where I am these days.
Wow, yeah.
Out of the engineering, like the telecom side, and now doing the can we figure out how not to destroy the world side full time? That's what I do now.
Yeah, well, that's why a big, every time I get to talk to you, I love it because of my technical background and diving into some systems and reliability stuff was my previous life. And I came to the same conclusions. Like, it was like the larger and the more complex the system is, the more chances you have for catastrophic failure. So our system is so large and complex and centralized that anything could disturb that system and cause the whole thing to come down, like you're talking about.
Right.
And that kind of led me down this was, leaving that old career and focusing on attempting to get people to realize, like, we have to become proactive and we have to save ourselves, because the whole system is designed so that it wants us to become dependent, so that they're the only answer and things are going to get crazy and they're not going to come to help you. They're not coming to help you.
Yep. Yeah. So let me give an analogy for people who may not have a technical background that is one that I found people intuitively understand. It'd be like the centralized command and control method of riding a bicycle ride. Okay. It would be like, okay, we want to have a bicycle ride. So we're going to get together a bunch of bicycle ride engineers, and they're going to plan out the bicycle ride. They're going to design the bicycle ride, okay? And they're going to have a complete design for this. And it's going to say that riders shall start by rotating, the pedals at exactly this many RPM. And we know what their trajectory, we know that the path down which we want them to ride. So at 1.7 seconds into the ride, they shall adjust the handlebars 2 degrees to the left. And 3.6 seconds later, they shall adjust the handlebars. And you have this whole, this is it. This is the design of the. So, all right, now the person gets on the bike. What's going to happen?
They're not going to read the manual.
Well, even if they did it perfectly, let's say that they did it perfectly, we all know they're going to fall down, right?
Yeah.
Because what's happening is the situation in which they are is complex, right? There's little pebble that gets under and pushes the bike. You hit a little bump or a little pebble, and the steering wheel goes over a tiny bit. You got to adjust in real time. This is the way complex
unforeseen events. Yeah.
Yes, there's all these little things, right? And so when you work with a complex system, it's like that feedback in the bicycle. It's like all these little micro adjustments because the complex system. And so what would happen, of course, is that even if you had a robot that would do exactly what the design was, a second or two into the bike ride, they fall over, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, they go back and blame the design engineers. Why it didn't work, right?
Right.
And it's like that is an impossible design task.
It's the Kobayashi Maru of design.
Yeah. It is, because it's like this is a complex system, and there's all these little things happening, in reality that are poking at what's happening and unfolding. The only way to ride a bicycle is to have the rider, have a plan for where they're going to go, have a goal, and then as they ride, when another bike rider pulls in front of them, they swerve around and, so on and so forth. These are the kinds of things that happen, and that could never have been planned for because you didn't know that bike was going to swerve or the dog runs in front of you, or the cat, runs in front of you, and you got to slow down or whatever. Or, as we said, there's unevenness, and and the mechanism of the bicycle isn't perfect, and you have to have that rider providing that real time, like sensing and constantly adjusting to what's going on. And that means that the decision of what to do on the bicycle, who's making that decision?
The bike rider.
The rider, not the CEO, right?
Yeah. Barking orders at the rider.
Right. Calling down orders to the bike rider, right? It's that can't work. And so this is why the centralized command and control technocracy fails. And the bigger it gets, the more, it fails. So this is why we devolve a lot of the decision making down to the edge. That's what I meant when I said that the feedback loop is really tight. What that means is that the rider can feel the bump and immediately adjust to it, right?
Yeah.
That means that the adjustment to the input is really short. It's very short loop, and it's very tight. And so that's how we have to work with these complex systems in order to be successful. Yeah.
Yeah. It really has to be localized, like you said, decentralized to be as robust as possible, so that the people that are there in that little area, they can make new decisions and change and adapt with different changes that are happening.
Yep.
And I know for myself, growing up around this area, going to school for engineering and being in Huntsville, that we have so many of the engineers around here that end up working for some Department of Defense contractor. And it's just, if I feel like if a lot of those guys would, come to some similar conclusions here, and instead of wanting to go work for those guys, to develop something that would actually lead to human flourishing and want to go in that direction instead. Would you have like any, I don't know, inspiration for those kind of folks out there?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I mean, it's like, especially I don't know how many of your listeners are local to Huntsville versus other places, but just a little bit of, background on Huntsville. A lot of the money that's flowing through here right now comes from defense spending and so forth. And that's where a lot of the jobs are,
right?
And a lot of the really good paying jobs, right? And so you had a lot of people who went through engineering school and they came out, they're looking for, a way to support their family, and to thrive. And, you go looking around and you go, well, that's the job I can find. And so, yeah, you have to kind of ask yourself, how do I feel about that, right? How do I feel being pulled into the military industrial complex? And I've refused to ever work in that. I was very, from the very beginning, I have friends who were in it for a little while and they now refuse to ever do that again. And part of the reason is that is another set of feedback loops. That whole group of companies, because their legal mandate to their shareholders is to maximize shareholder value, there is a lobby associated with that actually promotes global conflict. And that's what Eisenhower was warning about, even as far back as Eisenhower's farewell address. If you've never heard that, anybody listening, that's worth going back and listening to. Again, remember, this was General Eisenhower, who became President Eisenhower, who in his farewell address actually warned about the rise of the military-industrial complex. What he was talking about with that was there's the military, which to justify its own existence and growth has to find threats, right?
Yep.
And has to identify threats and has to sell the threat so that they can be funded.
Right.
Right. And so there's an incentive for them to oversell the threat so that they, but then there's the industrial part. That's the defense industry, the industry that sells all of the good, all the weapons and all the services and all the support and everything else too. And so they make their money off of all the money flowing to the military, and over it goes. And so what we end up with is what you call a perverse incentive structure. What you basically do is the more successful they are, the more money that those companies make. But that, okay, but in order to do that, we have to have global conflict. In other words, if everything were peaceful, well, if the globe were beautiful and peaceful, we wouldn't make too much money. Okay.
Right.
And again, this is what I call the problem of emergent evil. It doesn't take people, again, sitting around in a smoke-filled room, going, oh, well, we're just going to make certain that the world is full of conflict and millions of people suffer and die. It doesn't require that. It would almost be easier if it did, because you could go identify those people, right? And so forth. But in a lot of cases, it's like, nope, we are on the board of this company and we have, and we're doing what we have to do in order to protect our employees and keep our revenue flow going and that sort of stuff. And the emergent property of all of the military and all of these other companies doing what they do together comes out to be and the intelligence communities. I should have mentioned them in here as well, right? All of this together actually is the incentive structure for them to actually generate more peace or more conflict. That's an important question, right? And we can ask that question without accusing any individual person of necessarily being evil. It's they have a role in this whole thing, right? And maybe to them, what they are doing doesn't feel like it's, that they are doing what they're doing is evil. They're just doing their job and they're trying to protect their country and so on and so forth. But when you put all of it together, the emergence of it is to drive global conflict. And that's the emergent property. So that's why there are people that I know that are fairly conscientious that still maintain and are in that industry because they are looking at what they're doing and they feel okay with it. There's also people who've looked at it and gone, I can't participate in that because the emergent effect of all of it is something that I can't support, and therefore I have to be out of that. So I think maybe I won't go any further down that line, but it's kind of like, it's interesting. What we've ended up doing is creating a system of incentives that create an outcome. And so one of the deep things we do when we're doing the integrated regenerative design framework is we really study the incentive structures we're putting in place. Because this is Allen's rule of incentives, and it's really simple. It says this: be very, very careful what you incentivize because you will get more of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And that sounds like a almost silly, trivial statement until you think about the ramifications of what I just said. Be very careful what you incentivize. You will get more of it.
It's kind of the concept of voting with your dollar, right?
Right.
So whoever you decide to support with the money that you spend,
Yep.
that you are basically in essence giving energy to that, right?
Right. Exactly right. And it's like part of the reason that some of these big companies end up doing things that really seem inhumane and are inhumane is, again, we set up an incentive structure for publicly traded companies where if you go looking at it, like what's their for the members of the board of directors and the CEO and so on and so forth, what is their number one legal responsibility that they can get sued if they don't do it?
Making money for the shareholders.
Exactly right. Making money for the shareholders, right? So it's like I'm talking about, humans, we thought that oh, well, the profit motive will encourage growth and
Innovation.
innovation. And it does, right? But because we incentivize this one narrow thing, make the most money, right? And we really put that, then that becomes the neurotic, focus of this emergent thing we call a company. And so it will do things that most humans with a conscience wouldn't do,
Right.
because we put that incentive structure in place, right?
Right.
And for people who really want, to me, the poster child of that was, remember Bhopal, India?
No.
Oh, was that Union Carbide? I think it was Union Carbide. Don't quote me on it. I think it was. You can look that up. But if you look up Bhopal, India, then what you'll find is that there was this disaster in a chemical factory in Bhopal, India, back a long time ago. I'm trying to remember what exactly the year was. You can probably find it because looks like you got the Google foo going on. So what ended up happening was there was an accident and a release of toxic gas from this factory in Bhopal, India, right? And it killed a lot of people. I'm trying to remember exactly how many. I think it was over 1,000 people. It harmed a lot of other people, and so forth, right? I don't know if you found it.
Wikipedia says December 3rd, 1984, over 500,000 people in the vicinity of Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant were exposed to highly toxic gas, methyl isonate.
Yep. Yep. A couple thousand people died. A lot of other people were just, people who had high exposure either died or had just awful, health issues from there forward and so forth. And the basic story was that sort of the day after that, this was back in 1984, when, there were, you at least had the good grace, the CEO comes out and says, this is, our hearts go out to all the people. This is awful. We're going to make this right. So he's like, we're going to make this right. Well, of course, what happens is now the board meeting is called and the attorneys show up, right? Now, the attorneys have a legal duty to give legal advice to the board, and they know that the legal responsibility of them is to maximize shareholder value. And so the attorneys come in and go, from our ethical requirement is to give you the advice to be legal, and therefore we have to tell you that Union Carbide will be more profitable if you refuse to pay out and tell all these people to sue you, and you'll see them in court. Because most of these people have no ability to, they don't have the money to sue you, right? And you're in India and that jurisdiction and so forth. So your fiduciary duty is to basically tell all these people to go pound sand and to sue you if you want any money from Union Carbide. And so basically what happens is pretty soon Union Carbide is kind of like, yeah, no, we're not. It's like, come sue us, basically. I'm simplifying, but because there's a bunch of moving parts, but it's like, so this human response of like, oh my God, see what happened. We are responsible for this. We're going to take responsibility for this.
And
even
make it right and make the people whole.
Right, pay out, help this community to recover and so forth. Well, yeah, it's like, then all of a sudden these legal incentives and requirements come in, and these, and I can just see it, like, people going, oh, wow, if I don't do this thing, like, then I could be sued by all of my shareholders, and I would be found to be, not dispatching my fiduciary duty as a board member, right? And I could be held personally liable for this, right? So it's like, there you go.
That incentive is totally
right,
not non-humanity. Yeah.
correct. So be very careful what you incentivize, because you will get more of it. So if you incentivize companies making money as the number one thing that they are legally required to do, guess what? You will get more of it, and consequences be damned.
Right.
Right? And that's kind of where it goes.
Yeah. So the antithesis of that is to, have incentives that support the flourishing of life and humanity.
Yes, so. Exactly. And so that comes down to it. I keep on coming back to this fact that what we've got to do is we've actually eventually got to reorganize the incentive structures. One of the things to understand is that in complex systems are driven by a series of incentives and constraints. Complex systems will typically see constraints as problems to be found their way around in search of the incentives. Therefore, it is much more powerful design intervention to fix the incentives than it is to try to pile on more constraints.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, we'll just outlaw that. And you're like, sure. Okay. We outlawed dumping certain toxic chemicals into the environment. And okay, well, you can't arrest a company and put it in prison. It's a fictitious person.
Right.
So what do? You say, oh, we'll fine you, right? We'll fine you this amount of money if you do that thing. And they look at it and they go, well, if we do the thing, we'll make $10 billion. And if they catch us, we'll pay a $1 billion fine.
Yeah.
Done. Do it.
They don't care. Yeah.
Right. And so they just dump, because there you go. The constraint, right? It's like we went right around the constraint, or they find ways, wiggle ways around the constraints if the incentive is powerful enough for them to go after, right? And that's kind of the way. So in general, try to align the incentives so that it drives the seeking of the behavior that really makes things work and thrive, and try to minimize the constraints, because the constraints, if they get in the way of incentive seeking, that they typically don't survive long.
Well, I think now is a good time to segue into another one of the main topics that I wanted to cover with you, which is there have been all of these stories recently of flooding across the country. I think there was recently flooding in Wisconsin, and there was some big floods in Texas. There was also major flooding with Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee.
Yes.
And we've talked about this at our local meetings and got to pick your brain a little bit about this, but I know you have some unique perspective on that, and what could people do seeing that there's all these issues with some of this recent flooding? What could people keep in mind, or things that they could practically do in their local area to maybe mitigate some of this? Is there a chance that without having to do something on a drastically large scale, could the individual take some action to slow down water, help it infiltrate on their land, ways
Yeah,
to help with these flooding events?
I'm going to just say this, and I'm not really joking, but it's going to sound a little flip. Don't live in a 100-year floodplain. How's that for the first thing? Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And the whole problem is that we've been allowing people to build buildings in places that buildings should never have been put, at least not the kind of buildings that are put there, right? So, you know, I've been doing all this consulting on places that have had flooding events, and they're looking at how to move forward and so forth. And when I've done big design patterning, I've been called in to help like design communities, like at city scale. They're actually, the civil engineers are always stunned. I'm like, I want 100-year and 500-year floodplains on the map. They're not calculating 500-year floodplains. And when we're like figuring out where to put things, even put roads and so forth, I'm looking at the 500-year floodplain, and they're like, that's crazy. I'm like, no, it's not. Because like all over and over again, I'm running into situations where, and we had a 500-year flood event, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I'm going to tell everybody from a practical standpoint. Okay, we could get into the whole climate change debate. Here's what I will tell you. I'm not listening to the climate scientists right now because this whole thing has gotten so politicized. Who I am listening to are the hydrological engineers that are having to deal with flooding events. The farmers who have like multi-generational tenure on the land, who all of a sudden, all the weather patterns that they're seeing are like unprecedented back as far as they can remember, 6 generations back, and so on. So what I can tell you is this. I'm not going to get into the debate of why this is happening. What I will say is that the dynamics we are seeing in the climate system is more energy is being retained in the atmosphere, right? So sunlight comes in, that's energy coming in, and then usually what happens is infrared radiation goes off into space, and there's a balance between that, and we get this kind of balance. Because of a lot of things that have been going on, part of it natural, part of it probably man-made, all this stuff is happening, we're just getting more energy in the system, right? And so there's all this whole thing. Is it global warming? Is it da-da-da-da? It's like, okay, wait. More energy in a complex system, what does that do? Well, it makes the system's dynamics more dynamic-y.
Okay,
right?
more, yeah. Instability, I guess, or something.
The instability goes up. So here's the way to do it. Don't get into all kinds of arguments. What we're seeing empirically is that, it's like, and like I said, I'm seeing it in all these places where it's like going into communities and seeing these patterns of things pop up that are weird from historical. Okay, you mentioned Wisconsin. I know 2 people who live up there. I got calls right after the Milwaukee flooding, right? Here's the story, and this is why I think it's really weird. Of course, you're right there on Lake Michigan.
On the lake, yeah.
Right? 12 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the forecast is 20% chance of rain for the next 24 hours. 5 o'clock, it starts to just boom, rain. Okay. Between 5 p.m. and then like 2 o'clock the next morning, 12 inches of rain. Okay. Wow. 12 inches of rain. So it's like the weather pattern flipped so fast that the meteorologists in the noon weather report were saying maybe 20% chance of rain in the next 24 hours. Then from 5 until 2 the next morning, 12 inches. One of the people I know, her kids were with their grandparents. They were pulled out of their house at 2 o'clock in the morning by the fire department. The water was already neck deep in the house.
Oh my gosh.
It came up that fast, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so the fire department's going in with big front end loaders and everything and going through the water and trying to get into people and pull them out. And by the time the water, the rain is subsiding a few hours later, it's 15 inches of rain total. Right?
Yeah.
And these huge like flash flood events, boom. And it's like, okay, and we're seeing more of those kinds of extreme events where it's like, it's not the classic weather patterns we're used to seeing. It's like, and it's popping up really intense, very, very fast, and so forth. So what I tell everybody in terms of design is this. Since what we're seeing is a climate being driven by more energy in the system, it's like, imagine if you fed a room full of children a lot of sugar.
Yeah, they're going to be bouncing everywhere.
Yeah. Bouncing everywhere, right? And it's the same thing. There's more energy. So here's what I tell everybody. Assume that the wets are going to get wetter. The dries are going to get drier. The hots are going to get hotter. The colds are going to get colder, right? The shorts are going to get shorter and the longs are going to get longer. And what I mean by that is this whole thing of like the shorts getting short. It's like here in Huntsville, if you remember was it February, January, we had that temperature plunge. It was in the low 70s on Sunday at noon. People were running around in their shorts. You know, I saw a guy running down with no shirt on because it was so warm. And it was like, oh, it's wintertime and I'm going to get a little sun while we can, right? It's that warm. It's in the 70s. By like the next morning at like 5 in the morning, the temperature has gone down to like 4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right? It's gone down by 70 degrees Fahrenheit from noon until like 5 o'clock in the morning the next morning. Mm-hmm. That's like the shorts getting shorter. These extreme skews of like we go from hot to cold, so short. We go from dry to wet. So, but on the other hand, the longs can get longer. The hot spells can get really long. The cold spells can get really long. The wet spells can get really long. The droughts can get really long. And so, whereas you used to think that like the average length of a drought is this and the average length of a ice storm is that, nope. Assume that they can get longer, they can come faster, that the dynamics you can go from really hot to really, so, that's the way to think about your design challenge. Okay. Take every extreme that you were designing for before and make it more extreme-y. Okay. And then assume that it can go from extreme to extreme faster than you ever thought possible. And that extreme could possibly last longer than you thought possible. And that's your design brief, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what that means is that I'm now looking at things and I'm like, 100-year flood no longer happens once every 100 years. Right?
Yeah.
That was what the original, so they're working off of these old statistics that were valid back 50 years ago, right? They're not true anymore. So don't think of a 100-year storm as the technical definition is that a 100-year storm has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. Okay. Yeah, it ain't that way anymore. What they're calling a 100-year storm has a lot more than a 1% chance of happening in any given year, right? Okay. So that's what we're having to design for. So when I say don't live in the 100-year flood plain, I'm kind of serious. It's like that belongs to the hydrological system. We ought to respect that as part of the hydrological system that needs to be allowed to flood and do its thing because that dynamic is getting stronger and so forth. So it's like, really, we're going to have to repattern some things around this reality, whether we can agree on why it's happening or not, it is happening. And so what we tell everybody is basically kind of this. It's like you have two options on how to adapt to this. And I told them this when I was asked to come down to New Orleans right after Katrina. And I was like, you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to have to tell it to you because it's the truth. You can either start to look at proactively adjusting to this. Like there's communities here that should not be rebuilt where they are because they are going to reflood in a few years, right? It could be 20 years, it could be 30 years, but they're going to. So here's the problem. We're getting to the point where no insurance company is going to insure any building in this location. It's not a profitable bet for them. Therefore, they're not going to do it, right? As soon as you can't insure a building, no bank is going to finance it, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden, the only option to be able to rebuild in a place would be to rebuild paying in cash and then not being able to get insurance on that building. Which basically means you insure it yourself. If you're rich enough that you can just pay to rebuild the building every time it gets pushed and you don't have to have any insurance and you don't have to have any financing, I guess you can do it because you just have that much money. But for the reality of the average people, that's not going to happen, which means that if you have a community that has coherence, we have we can look at it and say, well, we need to find a new place for this community to be and have them and like work together to move them as a community and preserve that cultural integrity and that cultural, the culture, especially down in New Orleans, where there's all these really old, beautiful cultures that have, communities that have been there for a long time. And you're like, the other option is that the next time a flood event comes in, everybody's going to just move where they can. And you're going to have this diaspora of the people of that community, like poosh, and they're never going to come back together again. And you're going to lose that community. That community will cease to exist. And it's like, because economically, that's what's going to happen. So you can either think about moving in a mindful way and preserving something, or being forced to move when there's no other option, right?
Right.
So I would say when you are choosing where you are, choose carefully. We're getting to that point now. The other thing I would say is choose being mindful of both directions. One is look very carefully at the flooding potential of any place you are, but also look at the fact that we are abusing our water tables so much that areas that used to be water secure are now becoming water insecure. We were at a site that I won't name. It was here in Alabama. We were looking at it and so forth. And we're talking to the landowners about the history of water in that particular site. And when they got on that site almost 20 years ago, the groundwater table was up very high. Wells were doable. There were springs on the land that were running. The waterfall and the stream was running almost year round. All of a sudden, over the last 20 years, what do you get? Agriculture coming in, cutting down forests, a large amount of industrial ag, like chicken houses and everything, and people pumping water from wells. Right? So what do you think is happening to the groundwater all this time?
It's decreasing more and more.
More and more. All of a sudden, people who've had wells that have been functioning for 20, 30, some cases 40 years, the wells stop, right?
Yeah.
They're having to come back in and have somebody, if they can even drill a well on that site, they're having to get them go down 100 feet more just to get to some water now, right? That's a sign of what we're doing with this poor stewardship of our watersheds.
Yeah.
Cutting down more forests, pumping more water up without replacing. One of my design criteria, if I'm going in and I am going to recommend pumping water from the unconfined aquifer, that's the ground, not down in the confined aquifer, but in the unconfined aquifer, it's like we will make certain that we improve the groundwater recharge of this whole area to the point that we more than offset what we are pulling out.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, otherwise, we are depleting the groundwater. And when we do that, the water table goes down. Now the forests start to suffer. Now the forests start to go out. We're wondering why all of our forests are going out. It's because we're pulling our groundwater down, right? And now all the trees
we're taking more than we're putting back in.
Right, exactly. And in so many areas, what used to be recharge zones that would recharge the groundwater have become depletion zones where we're depleting the groundwater. And so when the trees go out, guess what? Well, the trees are part of the system that brings the rain and helps with the recharge. And so once you get to tree cover, falling out, you get into desertification.
Right.
This is why huge areas of Europe are desertifying. It's why areas of the West are further desertifying. We know exactly the dynamics of why this is happening. And it's because of our poor hydrological stewardship. We are causing this by this huge wholesale pumping of aquifers for irrigation, and of course, here's the great question. What is by acreage, what is the single largest irrigated crop grown in the United States?
Maybe corn?
No. It's really sad.
Soy, cotton?
No.
I don't know.
Lawn grass.
Oh. Okay, yeah. Wow, yeah.
Yeah. So we are depleting our aquifers and desertifying our landscapes in order to have a true green Kimlawn lawn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's sad. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's true. Lawn grass is the largest irrigated crop by far, larger than wheat, corn, soy, any of it. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, and a huge amount of chemical inputs. It's like it's crazy.
So if there's this much demand for water and we're putting so much strain on it right now,
Yes.
What happens when you start adding all these AI data centers on top of all that?
Yeah.
Could you talk about how those work and how their cooling systems work? Do you have some knowledge?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think how to just be able to summarize this quickly. A data center, by the way, is basically this big thing that looks like a high-tech warehouse with rows and rows of cabinets in it, with rows all of those cabinets are filled up with electronic equipment, servers and network switches and all the stuff that let them talk to each other, and power distribution units to power all of it. And so you can think of it as a constellation of 100,000 servers all in a building, all networked to be able to talk to each other and talk to the outside world. Now, if it sounds like it uses a lot of power, it does, right? And this is we're used to this with how do we get a Google search result? Well, Google has these massive data centers with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of servers doing all this stuff so that you can Google up the latest meme, right? And get your meme
videos
and be able to share it, right? And then it stores those memes and all that sort of stuff. And of course, Facebook has their server farms and Microsoft has their server farms, and all these big companies, they have these data centers. All right. And they pull a lot of power. What do I mean by a lot of power? Well, when I was doing some data center work, we could do a single cabinet, and the cabinet would go about this wide and about 7 feet tall and about 4 feet deep. And in that single cabinet, we could get as high as over 12,000 watts worth of electronic equipment in that one cabinet.
Just one cabinet? It's 12
right?
kilowatts? Wow.
12 kilowatts. Now, for those of you who don't speak engineer, one of the little space heaters that you can get, right, little space heater, A lot of times those are around 1 kilowatt. They take about 1,000 watts. That's, in that ballpark. So to get the heat radiating out of this one cabinet, imagine taking 12 of those. Don't plug them all in the same circuit. They have to each have their own dedicated circuit, right? Because they pull that much power. So now it's like you got to have, right? Take 12 wall outlets, each on a dedicated circuit, and plug 12 of those things in and feel how much heat comes out of that, right?
Yeah.
That's one cabinet.
Wow.
And now a row might have 30, 40 cabinets, and it's 50 cabinets in some big data centers, right? Row upon row upon row upon row of this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. Okay. So how do you power that? Well, you wind up with things that take megawatts upon megawatts of power, because not only do you have to power it, but you got to keep it cool, and it takes extra power to run the cooling system, right? Yeah. This is where a lot of times water comes in, because you circulating water. It's like, how do you dump all of that heat somewhere?
Yeah, where does the heat's got to go somewhere.
Somewhere. In some cases, they get like, oh, what we can do is we can pull water in from this river and dump all the heat in it, and then put the water back in the river. Well, of course, this is called heat pollution.
Yeah.
And it can be ecologically devastating, because the amount of oxygen that the water can hold goes way down when it gets hotter. So you get fish kills, and fish can't spawn. And so it's just ecologically devastating, right? It's like, it's not a freebie. They'll tell you, oh, well, we put the water back in, we just take it and use it and put it right back in. And it's like, yeah, you didn't put it back the way you found it, right?
Yeah.
You put it back in a lot hotter than when you found it, and it's not it's not a freebie, right? Okay, so now along comes this idea of AI, and the problem is that in order to run AI for all the people who want ChatGPT to rewrite their sales letter and make it more hooky, like, take this and rewrite it and such that it's got a hook in it for da-da-da-da-da, right? And so forth. And then, why did you put all those EM dashes in it? How did that happen, right? So that is what we're running with, what these call the large language model AI, which, by the way, isn't really intelligent. It just does a really good job of pretending to be intelligent. I don't have time to unpack that. But what it means is, okay, those things take a lot of compute. And so what you wind up with is they used to use GPUs, or the graphic processing units, that they used to use those. And now companies like NVIDIA have created specialized versions of things that look kind of like GPUs used to look, but they're now specialized to do the kinds of compute that AI needs in order to be able to do this. Okay. And by and large, they are power hogs. They take a lot of power, and you need a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, these companies, and I'm gonna kind of wrap up with this. I'll have to go here in a few minutes. I'll wrap up with this. What's happened is basically this. There is this idea that we're now in this AI arms race, so to speak, right? Right. That you're going to get, if AI is successful, it's going to get to the point where it can design the next generation of AI, and then it's going to explode. It's just going to get faster and faster and faster. And it's going to go towards what they call super intelligence. It's going to become smarter than all the people on the planet. And that's I have some issues and qualms with that, whether that's going to happen the way I think it's going to happen. But okay, the whole idea is that a country like the United States says, well, if somebody else, China, gets there first, we'll never catch up, because their AI will go running off, and it will have a head start, and we'll never catch up, and therefore we'll lose, right? Because we'll have our adversary, somebody like China, will have this super intelligence, and they'll be able to just, use that super intelligence to, and they'll win. So we have to have the super intelligence before they got it, which means throw every bit of money and power and everything else you possibly can. We don't care how much it costs. We don't know how much power it costs. We don't care. We just don't care. We have to win the arms race. Therefore, the government has kind of sidled up next to all these big AI companies. And there's, as far as I can tell, they're shoving the money in the side door, the back door, everything else. They're trying to push all the regulations out of the way because, as far as I can tell, somewhere in the national security apparatus, they probably defined that AI supremacy is a national security issue, right? And as you know, as soon as you make that determination, all kind of monies can start flying from all kinds of directions. So if you're wondering why all of a sudden we've got massive, massive data centers being built, which we really don't know how we're going to power, right? Except that all of a sudden they're like, oh, and maybe we should turn back on 3 Mile Island because we need that power. Oh, maybe we should start putting nuclear reactors in places. And all of a sudden we seem to be capable of like figuring out how to bring nuclear reactors in really fast. And oh, maybe we should like turn back on all these things we were trying to turn off, all this stuff. And all this power should go into AI data centers. Why did we have this magic, like, all of our priorities just changed, and now all of a sudden, if one of these big companies like Meta or Alphabet wants to build a massive data center, it's like full speed ahead, right? Just let at it.
Right.
It's because where we are is national security priority. We've got to we have to win. We've got to get there before somebody else does. And so I'm pretty certain this is what's going on. And this is why all this money is flying into it and so forth. And why people who are working on it are being paid ridiculous amounts of money. And it's being pushed. And most people don't realize that, like, these companies, there's so much power and equipment to do a thing like run a chat GPT that even when they're charging you like $20 a month to run chat GPT for their
losing money. Yeah.
They're losing all kinds of money, right? That's not paying for itself right now. So it's like, yeah, that's where we are, right? And so, like, people are talking about building these like ridiculously big data centers, like data centers literally the size of Manhattan.
Yeah, I was hearing a story about one that was like going to be on 400 acres or something like that.
Yeah, it's like vast, right? Actually, even bigger than 400 acres. You're talking about some stuff that's crazy. And you're like, yeah, and you'd need a dedicated nuclear reactor just to power that, right?
And how much water to cool everything?
Exactly. How much water to cool it? And so it's like, so this is where we are, and we're in this race. We're basically in the new arms race. That's the way to understand it, right? We're in the new arms race. The new arms race is to get to artificial super intelligence, or something like it, okay? And that's the new arms race. So if you were really basically to think about it in those terms as an arms race, right? It's kind of like the race to the hydrogen bomb back after World War II, right? You can't let your enemy get to the hydrogen bomb first, right?
Right.
And so that's where we are. It's literally the new arms race, and that's, to me, it's the only way you can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, Alan, so much, man. I know you got a heart out that we're coming up on here, and so I really appreciate your time. Where can people find and support your work, Alan?
So right now we have been taking the Institute, we've been teaching everything. We've actually been maneuvering it over and getting it set up as a nonprofit finally, and we're finding land for it in North Carolina right now. But the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design, so the website's changing, everything's changing. If you go to the Institute's website, you can sign up for our mailing list. We're about to relaunch the newsletter in a new way. It's i2rd.co. And even though it's not in perfect shape right now, you read a little bit about what we're doing. New curriculum is about to come up and be published online. So a lot of cool stuff. That's where we're teaching the professionals and so forth. We have some other things I'll be announcing soon on community level stuff, and how we're working with communities to help people, basically attack a lot of these challenges at community level. So watch out for that. We got some cool stuff that's unfolding right now, and we'll probably be able to come back and give you more information on that soon.
Yeah, man, I want to have you back anytime, and reach out to you and see if we can get you back on in the future to let everybody know all the new stuff that you have going on. So
perfect.
Thank you so much, Alan. I really appreciate you. And y'all, if you got some value out of this, please share it with others. And Alan is a wealth of knowledge. I'm super grateful you came on to spend some time with me, Alan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.